Welcome to We Would See Jesus. Today we want to cover the topic, we are in the world, but not of the world. So first off, let's establish, what does the Bible mean by the world? In some instances, it's referring to the known universe, the earth and its known universe. But in most cases, especially in the New Testament, it's referring to something quite different. 1 John 2:16, for all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life is not of the Father, but of the world. So in this context, the world contains a very evil spirit, and it moves upon the earth, enticing men and women, and working toward the weaknesses of our flesh. Let's examine each one of these. The lust of the flesh. First off, the flesh is what you look at in the mirror every day. And what is it then that this man that you're looking at right now, what is it that he needs and wants? First off, we all need food. That's first. Man can only live approximately 3 weeks without food. Then liquids. Man can only live about 4 days without liquids, especially if they're exerting themselves or in a hot climate. I still remember as a young man, I underwent a 5-day fast where I went without food or water. Now, first of all, I don't know why they call it fasting. They should call it slowing, because those were the 5 slowest days that I can ever remember living in my life. It's like, it was just, when it was over, it was like, I was just I'm very relieved. And I have to admit, after the 5th day, I didn't feel very spiritual. All I felt was hungry. Which leads us to when Moses fasted 40 days and 40 nights, and he received the 10 Commandments written in stone. Then he went down and busted the 10 Commandments because the children of Israel were steeped in idolatry, went back up and fasted another 40 days and 40 nights. Only by the grace of God could he have lived through that, because typically without liquids, a man can only live approximately 4 days. The next thing that the flesh desires is physical pleasure. Now, physical pleasure in and of itself is not sin. Eating, drinking is not sin. Physical pleasure is not sin. For example, if you have a mosquito bite, it feels so good when you scratch that mosquito bite, which is not the best thing to do, but it sure feels good. There's no sin in that. Then you have sexual desire. Again, God made us this way, and we do have sexual desires, men and women both. And in and of itself, this is not wrong. This is not sin. And even sexual gratification is not sin if it's done in the right way and as God intended. So these things are not wrong in and of themselves. However, it becomes the lust of the flesh, not just the natural makeup of the flesh, but the lust of the flesh, when you have an unhealthy application of any of these things. So for example, food, eating food obviously is not sin, but gluttony is sin. You've drifted into the lust of the flesh. Then also liquids. So drinking is not a sin, but if you are drunken with alcohol, you have drifted into the lust of the flesh. And this is kind of the way every one of these work. Physical pleasure, for example, nothing wrong with physical pleasure. But if you misuse that and start getting into sexual physical pleasure that is outside of the realm of marriage, then you have drifted into the lust of the flesh. Same way with sexual desire and sexual gratification. So there's a place for it, but when you drift outside of it, you have drifted into the lust of the flesh, and that is sin. The next is the lust of the eyes. And I'm literally saying these eyes. We have lust in our eyes when we are sinning. Now, it's natural and it's good to admire beauty. I love looking upon beautiful landscapes, especially snow-capped mountains, gorgeous lakes, rivers, um, oceans. Just it's beautiful in nature itself. And these are natural and they're good. Also, beautiful works of art. These are all fine, and also people. Looking at people and admiring their beauty is nothing wrong with that. But the lust of the eyes comes in when you have an unhealthy wanting of that which we look upon. So there's a lot of people that are steeped in pornography. It's widespread. It's easily obtainable on the internet. They tell me that's a line that you cannot cross. You cannot go there. That you have drifted into the lust of the eyes. Remember what Jesus said, if you even look upon a woman to lust after her, you have committed adultery with her already in your heart. Pornography is sin. It's a sin against God. Also, if a covetousness, the Bible says, thou shalt not covet. That's kind of the keeping up with the Joneses. Your neighbor gets a new boat, so you want to get a new boat. Your neighbor gets a new vehicle, and you want to get a new vehicle. That's covetousness. It is the lust of the eyes. And finally, the pride of life. So the pride of life is a hunger and a drive for power, money, and prestige. That's what the pride of life is. It's a craving that has destroyed countless lives, especially targets their relationships. Their relationships absolutely just crumble around them because they are so busy with that drive for power, money, and prestige that their relationships crumble. Relationships, by the way, are the most important thing that, besides our own personal soul, is the most important aspect of life. Don't let the pride of life destroy your relationships. So in short, the world's philosophy, this evil spirit that we're talking about, is live your lives with no moral constraints. That's what they teach. That's what this spirit teaches. Take off the moral constraints, live your lives as free men. That's what they say. But we know something that they don't know. The book of Psalms, the kings of this earth have all joined together to turn against the Lord and his chosen king. They say, let's cut the ropes and set ourselves free. What are they talking about, ropes? They're talking about the moral boundaries that God gives to us. God gives us moral boundaries, and these moral boundaries are healthy for us. But wicked governments want to eliminate these boundaries, especially totalitarian type governments, because they can't be the greatest source for information and for discipline if there's a God. So if there's a God, they always have to take second place. They're always second in command. That's why I love the United States. We are created one nation under God. And of course, they have taken that Pledge of Allegiance out of the schools, which is just another step, another brick in that wall, so to speak. A life that's lived without moral constraints is an insane life. There's actually a definition for the word insanity. The insane person has a mind that has no boundaries. A person whose mind has no boundaries is clinically insane. And a life without moral boundaries is an insane life. 1 Corinthians, when I wrote to you before, I told you not to associate with people who indulge in sexual sin. But I wasn't talking about unbelievers who indulge in sexual sin, or are greedy or cheat people or worship idols. You would have to leave this world to avoid people like that. I meant that you're not to associate with anyone who claims to be a believer, yet indulges in sexual sin, or is greedy, or worships idol, or is abusive, or is a drunkard, or cheats people. Don't even eat with such people. So we rub elbows with the people of this world every single day. We do business with organizations that are founded and run by evil people. And there's no getting around this. Otherwise, we would have to be transported off of this earth. Now, understand that we are the hope of the world. So if we refuse to be in the company of unbelievers, we condemn them to destruction. We are their hope. So we are the light of the world. Jesus says, as long as I'm in the world, I am the light of the world. But then he turned and said, now you are the light of the world. And he's talking about us. And if we withdraw that light from unbelievers, those who live in darkness, we condemn the world to utter darkness. So we are in the world, but we are not of the world. And this is where you have to be careful, because if you're rubbing elbows with them and you like their lifestyle, then you're not positively affecting them. They are negatively affecting you. So be careful of that. We are in the world, but we are not to partake of the things that they partake of. We are not to get drunken. We are not to go to their parties and take their drugs and use profanity and curse the name of God. None of that. Pornography, sexual sin, none of that. We are in the world, but we are not of that. All right. Jesus said, you belong to this world here below, but I am come from above. You are from this world, but I am not from this world. What he said here, you belong. That's a really powerful phrase. You belong to this world. Understand that unbelievers truly belong to this world. They are the possessions of this world, and they are the slaves to this world. But we are free to devote ourselves to God. In fact, Paul wrote this, don't you realize that you become the slave of whatever you choose to obey? You can be a slave to sin, which leads to death, or you can choose to obey God, which leads to righteous living. And Jesus in another place said, when the Son makes you free, you will be really free. We are free to serve God. We are no longer slaves to this world. And we don't belong to this world. Jesus said, I have given them, he's praying to the Father, and the world hates them because they do not belong to the world. You see, we don't belong to the world. Just as I do not belong to the world. I'm not asking you to take them out of the world, but to keep them safe from the evil one. They do not belong to this world any more than I do. Wow, that's powerful. You and I do not belong to this world. We are free men, free women. We are not enslaved to this world and enslaved to the desires of our flesh. We are free. We are really free. Jesus also said this, if the world hates you, remember that it hated me first. The world would love you as one of its own if you belong to it, but you are no longer part of the world. I chose you to come out of the world, so it hates you. Anyone who hates me also hates my Father. Understand, the world hates Christians, and it's not because of my personality that they hate, and it's not because of my teaching that they hate, but they hate the Spirit of Christ. They hate the Spirit of the holiest God. That's what they hate. And I have a quote. It's hanging actually in my restroom at the office, and it says, don't let anyone diminish your light just because it's shining in their eyes. And that's the way it is with Christians. Our light is shining in their eyes, and so they hate us because of that. Just like the darkness hates the light, evil hates righteousness, dysfunction, hates function. Unbelievers, many times, they absolutely hate, detest Christians. In 1 John, but you belong to God, my dear children. You have already won a victory over those people because the Spirit who lives in you is greater than the spirit who lives in the world. Those people belong to this world, so they speak from the world's viewpoint, and the world listens to them. But we belong to God, and those who know God listens to us. If they do not belong to God, they do not listen to us. That is how we know if someone has the spirit of truth or the spirit of deception. Are they listening to us? If they listen to us, then they have the spirit of truth. But if they don't listen to us, or they disagree, they want to be disagreeable, they have a different spirit, and it's not God's spirit. It's the spirit of the world. And as I mentioned before, the world has a very evil spirit dwelling in it. Understand that I watch a lot of different YouTube channels, subscribe to like dozens of them, and it always amazes me that the Christian, you could take a really great Christian channel and it gets quite a few viewers, but nothing like NFL, for example. The NFL, they get millions and millions of views, and that's kind of the way it is. People want pleasure, they want entertainment rather than wholesome, godly teaching. And that's always amazes me because there's some really great YouTube channels. Living Waters is one of my favorite. There are many, and so many of them I couldn't even begin to. I should probably enumerate them and let you know sometime. Maybe I'll do that. Anyway, but this shouldn't surprise us that a lot of people watch worldly channels, but not the same people are watching godly channels. Because Jesus said this, you can enter God's kingdom only through the narrow gate. The highway to hell is broad, and its gate is wide for the many who choose that way. But the gateway to life is a very narrow, and the road is difficult, and only a few ever find it. Wow. And that truly explains it. The multitudes are not going to follow godly channels unless they themselves are godly. Then we'll go to the book of James, and this is very strong. He says, you adulterers, don't you realize that friendship with the world makes you an enemy of God? An enemy. I say it again, if you want to be a friend of the world, you make yourself an enemy of God. Wow. Now, I mentioned that we always rub elbows with the world. And if you like what they're doing, you literally have become an enemy of God. Don't go there. I'll leave you with one last scripture. Jesus said, and what would you benefit if you gain the whole world but lose your own soul? Is anything worth more than your soul? Wow. Understand that your soul is your most valuable possession. It's worth more than your house. It's worth more than all of your possessions that you own, your wardrobe. It's worth more than the entire world. Jesus showed us this when he was tempted of Satan. Remember that Satan took him up to an exceedingly high mountain and showed him all of the glories of the entire world and the entire world in a moment and said, I'll give it all to you if you just bow down to me. And Jesus didn't think about it. He'd go, that doesn't sound like such a good deal. No, instantly he said, get behind me, Satan. It is written, you shall worship the Lord your God, and him only will you serve. Because Jesus understands his soul is worth way more than the entire world. I'm going to leave you with a quote, more of a story. An old man told his grandson, my son, there is a battle between two wolves inside us all. One is evil. It is anger, jealousy, greed, resentment, inferiority, lies, and ego. The other is good. It is joy, peace, love, hope, humility, kindness, empathy, and truth. The boy thought about it for a while and he asked Grandfather, which wolf wins? The old man quietly replied, the one you feed. I'll leave you with that today. God bless you all, and we'll see you next week.